Cool. This is amazing. So, as people are coming in, I just want you to think about the reason that you came here today. There must have been some reason for you to either join the talk, and it could be a personal reason, it could be a birth, it could be a death, or like something that happened in your life that made you realize you want to get into family history and want to know more about your genealogy. So if you could just like keep that in mind at the forefront of your mind through Chrislyn's talk, and also in the next coming days or in the next month as you're all thinking about this and hopefully going attending further talks, because this is going to make it meaningful for you if you really keep that motivation and build upon it throughout these talks. There will be something for everyone in these talks. And so it's really important that that you're able to get the most out of this. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that motivation, whatever it could be to see Chrislyn today, and that's the reason you're here. But if you have a personal reason, then and you're brave enough to share it, please go ahead and share it with us. Yeah, I can share a little bit about my own personal reason. I know that's kind of scary to get it, but if anybody will be watching the chat, if anybody wants to say why they're looking into family history, if it's for being able to realize more about yourself and to dig deep into your own roots, to recognize you're at a place where you realize you want to know yourself better. And I think that's an awesome reason, and definitely worth the time and research that you're putting into this. I'm doing this for my son, Michael, who was born about 5 months ago, and I want him to be able to know his roots. He's half Chinese, he's half Taiwanese, and then a quarter Mexican, a quarter European American. And I want him to be familiar with and accepting of all his different identities. And as someone who is mixed Mexican American myself, I think that was hard for me. So I want to give him that ability to feel like he belongs in those areas and to know where he comes from, because we all stand on the shoulder of giants. We are here not because of ourselves, but because of what our ancestors did and the sacrifices that they made. So it would be really good for him to know that and be able to grow from that. And we have so many talks coming up. Our talks are going to be, if you're interested in Asian American history, you can come to Granton's talk. And it's about Chinese, Japanese history. And then we also have Pastor and his own family history. And then we also have Pastor Tina Tang Henson, who is going to talk about her family's Chinese experience in Taiwan. And that will be really good reflection of her family history, but also her spiritual genealogy. And then we also have Marissa Lee, who is going to talk about activities for families to do to reach out to their family history. And that will be good to attend because she's intergenerational. Josie Reese will give some tips about how to travel and also what people can do if they want to dig deep into their family history without knowing very much. But after doing a lot of research, she was able to do a lot of activities with her family through that. So, and then we'll also talk about Mexican American heritage, which is going to be from next week, and that's looking into your indigenous roots from Mexico. If you're into philosophy or existentialism, come to this family memoir that George Kurtz is doing, and he's going to be basing it off his family memoir from Kierkegaard, which I just finished reading the book. It's really good, and it aptly is described as spiritually lyrical. So if you're into spirituality, come to that talk or Tina Tang Henson's talk, and then Raj Sidhu is also doing his testimony for the LDS Church, and talking about his life experience of going into muscular dystrophies. And then our keynote speaker is going to be Thomas Allen Harris, and he is starting this movement of doing this digital family photo album, and it's a collective photo album. He's also creating a lot of connections and talking about historical events that like unearthing a lot of connections and historical events that have happened all throughout the US. So definitely come to all of these talks, and you're going to learn a lot about yourself and how to go about researching your family history and how to make it live. It's not just something like filling out a tree, but it will be a live event. So that brings me to Chrislyn Chu's talk today, which I'm so excited to have her here. She's fantastic. She came on as a recommendation from somebody, and I'm really glad and grateful to be able to work with her today. So let me give her introduction. Chrislyn Chu is the Brand and Innovation Director at My China Roots, a genealogy startup helping families trace their ancestral homes, records, and relatives in China. An Emmy-winning video producer, she loves documenting the full circle adventures we embark on to feel at home in our mosaic stories, as seen in the Netflix documentary Found. At the height of the pandemic, she founded an intergenerational community on Discord for over 1,000 ancestral detectives to explore their heritage together. An Enneagram certified facilitator, Chrislyn leads workshops on the ethics of storytelling, equipping filmmakers and scholars alike with the mindfulness and relational skills to steward the community stories they're trusted to tell. As she continues to trace her own roots in the US, China, and Malaysia, Chrislyn draws to capture this word, which I can't pronounce, but it can be translated to what can be sensed yet eludes words. So I'll give it up to Chrislyn, and maybe she can pronounce that word for us.
Thank you, Sochi. And the Chinese phrase is 知可意会不可言传. But it's, that which we feel deeply, but might elude words, but we feel it. And so I think family history is very much about trying to bring to light a lot of those unspoken things that we feel deeply. So yeah, thank you so much for that introduction and just putting together this wonderful series, Sochi. As I've been popping into the chat, we will be doing a little short reflective writing activity later on in this talk. So if you haven't already, be sure to just grab some of your favorite pen and paper, can be analog, can be digital, but just, somewhere for you to be able to be present and download the thoughts that are coming up for you as we go through today in the next hour. Here's a little just quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. I want to say that the role of a family historian might be one that, perhaps feels very new for you. Maybe it's one that you deeply identify with. Wherever you are on your journey, just thank you for leaning in with curiosity, with care for your ancestry. It is a gift for your family, for future generations, whether or not they appreciate it. And today I hope that our conversation will help you come away with a bit more clarity about what exactly does it mean to you to be a family historian. We're going to talk about reframing it in a way that you can set healthy expectations of yourself and what success looks like, because this is lifelong work and it's meant to continue well beyond each of us. And I will also introduce a framework for the phases of a roots journey, which you can use at any time to help identify some of your next steps. So here's a little visual preview of the phases that we will touch on today. And as we go through each of them, I will be sharing some stories from the context of my experience with the Chinese diaspora specifically. But overall, this arc is universal and can be applied to anyone who's trying to reconnect with their roots. So phase one begins with reflection. And some of you have already begun to do this in the text chat. Thank you so much for sharing. And now at this time, I'm going to lead us through a guided exercise to self-reflect and just kind of connect, with why you're here today. What is it in you that is, what is that question that is begging to be answered? So we're going to take the next 10 minutes or so. And as we lean in, let this be a time for yourself to be fully present and, kind of get cozy. If you need to turn off the lights, if you need to, get a blanket, whatever helps you feel grounded. This is the time. So to begin, I just want to invite all of us here to actually close our eyes and tune in to the sound of your breath. And together, let's just take a slow inhale on the count of 4. So inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. And exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. And again, inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold. And exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold. Keeping your eyes closed. Just take this moment to check in and ask yourself, why is preserving my family history so important to me? And who exactly is this all for? If any specific faces kind of swim to mind for you, just notice them. Kind of note, what are their names? What's their relationship to you? And how does their presence make you feel? And now, ask yourself, what legacy do I want to leave? Because remember, I am an ancestor too. And if I were to imagine for a moment my loved ones were telling my story, what might they say? How might they write about me? What do I hope they will remember about me? When you feel ready, slowly open your eyes. And we'll take the next couple minutes or so to just write down what is coming up for you. It could be thoughts, emotions, maybe sensations in your body. Just observe and let yourself free write or maybe draw if that feels comfortable for you right now. But just express yourself without any filter. And I'll put the questions again in the chat in case that helps as a reference. So we'll take the next couple minutes just to notice what comes up for you. And don't feel pressured to necessarily answer every question. Just notice what is coming up. All right, that's time. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to share some of your reflections with everyone else in the text chat. It could be a specific line that you wrote, maybe something that you personally just want to remember from your reflections. But yeah, feel free to share in the chat. I really loved what Amy, you wrote down already of being a product of many generations of people, being a testimony to your mother's hopes for a better future. I really resonate with your hope that my loved ones will remember me as someone who tried her best to learn about the community around her and live a meaningful life of service. That's beautiful. And Elliot, part of a larger story. So many layers of story. The beginning of the story, the middle of the story, continuing the story. Yeah. All of these questions and thoughts that you're sharing are exactly what come to mind for me as well. When I think about my journey, it all started honestly with just wanting a deeper connection with my grandparents. I grew up in the US while they were always in Malaysia. And when they passed away, I had just started college. And I remember feeling a deep sense of grief. But what I really grieved, I think, was more the absence of grief. Like, oh, I don't even know them well enough to know who I'm losing. And so the year that they passed, I decided to try and make a video as a tribute to them and just as a gift for my parents, something to try to remember them by. And at the time, I wasn't thinking at all about research. I was like, I just want to make a video. But in the process, I realized like, oh my gosh, I don't even know their names. Like I just call them yeah, ama. Like I don't know when their birthdays are. I really don't know much about their lives. What they were doing when they were my age, like nothing. So that was the first time that I really started asking my extended family for help to crowdsource our stories and try to preserve the memories of our ancestors together. And now, kind of fast forward to my 25th birthday, I had a quarter life identity crisis of sorts and decided to move to China to explore my heritage. And I was just really curious, like, what does it mean to be a child of the Chinese diaspora? Like, what does it mean to, come from, another context? And what do I do with all that I've been given, without having to do anything besides being born? So I got in touch with My China Roots, which is the genealogy startup I work with now. And with their help, I was able to return back to the ancestral villages of my grandparents in southern China. And we were able to reconnect with a lot of my relatives there and find records as well that trace back, hundreds of years of our lineage. That's a whole longer story in and of itself. But what I can say overall now, having embarked on this journey, is that I just feel a lot closer with my family and with my roots. And the more that I understand my grandparents, the better I feel I understand my parents, and the better I understand myself. This is my favorite photo from my parents' wedding day with my three grandparents that I got to know while they were still alive for a bit. And through just digging and peeling back the layers, I've learned that I come from a lineage of artists and entrepreneurs who really built bridges across cultures. And by doing this work now in my own way, I hope that their legacy will continue to live on in me too. And yeah, as I get older, I'm looking at my nieces and nephews kind of running around and just realizing like, oh, wow, okay, the next generation, they're here. I want them to feel connected with their roots too, especially because as you can see, some of them have mixed heritage, just like, Sochi's children. So I hope that by passing on our family history, this will help them feel connected with each part of their mosaic identity, every thread, so that they feel whole and so that they can really flourish. Yeah, so these are two questions that I'm asking myself a lot right now as I'm like Auntie Chrislyn now. How can I preserve our stories in a way that's accessible and inspiring, engaging for the next generation? And also keeping an eye out for like who will carry out this work when I am gone, right? Who do I pass this torch to? because not everyone will always care, or just be interested. And I remember when I first got started with genealogy, people, like, I often heard it said, like, every generation has that one person who is cursed or blessed with getting bitten with the family history bug. And for me, taking on the mantle of the family historian has definitely been a blessing for the most part. But there are definitely days where it's easy to feel overwhelmed and even lonely. Like, there's just so many dots to connect. Like, what if I can't figure it all out? Like, what if no one even cares at the end of the day, right? So, as you preserve your family history, I encourage you to ask yourself as well, like, what do I see as my duty, or my responsibility? And what would make me feel like I've done enough or just done my part? For some people, it's super important to fill out like the whole family tree, right? Like trace back hundreds of years. And for other people, it's enough to just focus on one ancestor and just telling their life story. And so the scope will differ for every single one of us. So it's really important to just, take that time to reflect and set some healthy boundaries for yourself of, what does success look like for me? So that you don't put too much pressure on yourself and can actually enjoy each challenge and discovery along the way. So those are just a couple guiding questions to help you kind of align with your inner compass as you go forward. Now I'm going to move into, how do we take these intentions and actually put them into action? So the 5 phases, they can actually kind of be split in these 2 pathways of storytelling and data gathering. And data gathering, the phases in blue, they refer essentially to anything that you do to find out more information, like new information that you don't currently have. Whereas the storytelling phases in gold, they're about meaning making, like what do these data points mean to you? And what can we learn about ourselves from this information? And honestly, in practice, you'll find that you're kind of like flowing and always cycling between these 2 pathways. It's more like an infinity loop, or, like the 2 strands of a DNA double helix. Family history tends to unfold in a very circular kind of rhythm. And yeah, so it's very, very normal to move between both of these season to season. So I'm going to start with the storytelling pathway first, because I found it's a common misperception that you have to do a ton of data gathering and genealogy research first before you can preserve your family history. I actually remember our first conversation, Sochi. She told me like she's been creating these picture books for her kids based on her own memories and letters from her grandmother. And at the same time, though, there are moments where she's felt stuck and wondering, like, is this enough? Like, I'm recording down the things that are meaningful to me, that I think could be helpful for my children. Is that okay? Does it need to be more factual, more historical? Do I need to start doing more genealogy research? And Sochi's words really resonated with me because I've had similar doubts too. Like when I'm recording my family history, to what extent should I include my own observations and my own opinions too? And ultimately, like what is worth recording and thus remembering, and who gets to decide that? So if you're wondering this, to you, to Sochi, to myself, what I want to affirm today is like, yes, it is enough. Like if it's meaningful to you, that is enough. We are ancestors too, so our voices matter. And if something speaks to you, definitely write it down, because chances are it will speak to someone else as well. Another doubt that I've often heard is, oh, but like, I'm not a writer, I just, yeah, like I need to, this is like a whole project, right? I don't have time for this. I'm not a writer. Another one is, isn't it narcissistic? Isn't it self-absorbed to write about myself? Like, won't that be very, yeah, who does that? And to this, I want to affirm again, like as an ancestor, your voice matters. And so really trust that your perspective is a gift, and being present to your lived experience. Like maybe it's the way you remember your childhood, or how you feel returning back to your ancestral homeland one day, like taking the time to record your eyewitness report, that is in itself a very valuable thread in the tapestry of your family history. Another doubt that has cropped up in my brain before, and I've often heard is, okay, but aren't my personal views too subjective? Shouldn't family history be more factual or historical? And honestly, this one could be its whole own talk of its own, because, the wisdom usually of indigenous oral history traditions has been devalued by Western definitions of what counts as a reliable or unreliable source of knowledge. So subjectivity, objectivity, this is a whole thing, tension. But what I will say today is to think of ancestral storytelling as memorializing. Like the root of memoir is memory, right? And memories are the stories that we tell ourselves about the things that leave the biggest impressions upon us, the things that feel truest to us. And just as we change over time, our memories will also change over time, right? They will mirror who we are. They will show who we're becoming. So yeah, no, like there's no such thing as an objective, impartial family history. Like, and that's humanity for you. The gift of memory is perspective. And that is how wisdom gets passed on. And this perspective is how our team at My China Roots actually views genealogy records. So the picture on screen, this is an example of a zupu or a jiapu, which can be seen as like a family tree book that is often kept by Chinese clans, and they trace back thousands of years. And this record is often seen as the holy grail of Chinese genealogy. But even so, we tend to view it less as a source of like capital T truth, but more as like a window into how did our ancestors view themselves, right? So it's almost like a yearbook from high school, right, where you curate like the best representation, like the greatest hits. A zupu can reveal a lot about your ancestors in that way, right? Like what did they value? Who did they see as their role models? Like how did they want to be seen? How did they want to be remembered? It's almost like, yeah, the story of the story that your ancestors like to tell about themselves. And so all this to say, if you don't know where else to start, you can start right now just by recording the stories that you already know and the stories that you believe are worth remembering. And make sure you write down your own story too, because again, you are an ancestor, so honor your experience. And I will actually say that the exercise of holding your own story will make you a better storyteller of other people's stories. Because, every family tree has heroes, has villains. And as a storyteller, like you get to decide how to represent them and how they're portrayed and how they're seen. So if you kind of think back to the free writing question I asked you earlier, like, how would you want someone to represent you in history? Like, what standard would you want them to hold themselves to? For me, writing down my story has helped me realize that I do not like to be misunderstood. And I really love being given the benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, like I'm human too. I've made mistakes and I want the next generation to learn from my errors. And so as a family historian, I try to do my best to represent my ancestors with that same level of honesty and integrity. And so I acknowledge like the virtues, but also the vices that happened and look at it, as honestly as I can, just be like, all right, what can we, the living, learn from how they lived? And, that is legacy. That's their legacy. So that's storytelling in a nutshell. Also, if you all have any questions at any point, feel free to just drop it in the chat. We will have a Q&A time later on. Okay, so that's storytelling. Now, when does it make sense to start doing genealogy research, aka data gathering? This one pretty much goes back to your goals and motivations that you identify through reflection. If you have questions about literally anything, like you want to find out more information about the historical or cultural context of your ancestors, you want to find out like, do you have relatives in XYZ place, right? Then all of that are great reasons to just put on your detective hat and start digging. These three phases, rally, research, and return, these are three great ways you can go about doing that. And as we go through each of these now, I will also share some tips for Chinese genealogy research as well. So yeah, Rallying. The main idea here is that family history research is not a solo sport. Like it literally takes a village. So be willing to ask for help for your support system. And your support system can be a combination of your family and also your community. For My China Roots, we have a free community on Discord with over 1,000 people online who are just helping each other with their family history research. And I see some of you here today, so hello, thank you for joining. We started this community about 2 years ago, and we've seen like a lot of breakthroughs happen just through peer support. So definitely encourage you to lean into that. And if you're more active on Facebook, I know there's a lot of genealogy groups there as well. And I recommend searching for groups that are specific to your diasporic identity. So whether it's like Japanese American genealogy or like Jewish ancestry, there's a lot of groups. So yeah, go and check those out and plug in. Now, within your family, here are 3 types of allies that you can look out for and try to recruit to support you. The first is open books. They're the natural talkers who are just very happy to spill the tea, just tell you all the stories. Branch connectors, they're the relatives who make a really great effort to stay in touch and get people together, organize family reunions. I have an uncle who keeps a very detailed spreadsheet of everyone's contact information and always gets us together. And so when I was living in China, he actually introduced me to our relatives there over WeChat and put us in touch and help translate our conversations. So yeah, ask those people to help introduce you to new branches of the family. And finally, memory keepers. These are just those who've come before you. So you have any relatives who've already started doing this research work, sync up with them, join forces. You do not have to start from scratch. And when you're connecting with your family, ask if they have any of these types of clues. Could be paper records, heirlooms, memorial objects. All of these can be really rich sources of information. And if you are trying to trace Chinese ancestors, you want to look out for any names and places in both English and Chinese characters. And it is very normal for these puzzle pieces to be scattered among different relatives. So get in the habit of just asking like, okay, who has what, where? And, would you be so kind as to share this information with me? You're just kind of gathering clues and different people will have different pieces. Once you rally your allies and clues, then you can start to really dig into the research phase. And a great place to start with doing that is by conducting oral history interviews with your family members. And especially if you have elderly, like grandparents who are still alive and are lucid, don't wait, interview them, talk with them before it's too late. And I also recommend, writing down your questions and the things that you want to find out from them. At the same time, if you want to have fruitful conversation, focus on like creating deeper connection with your loved ones through the conversation versus trying to extract information from their brain. I've seen some interviews just absolutely flop because the relatives feel like they're being interrogated and they just clam up and back out. And if it feels like an interrogation, that can also be very like triggering for some relatives who have a lot of like unresolved trauma or shame from their past. So be mindful, tender roots, tender ground. Let's go in with, really open heart and open mind and see it as quality time and like an opportunity to get to know your loved ones better. Sometimes you can set up like, more formal sit-down interviews if your relative is open to that. Other times you might just literally need to like let it come in your everyday life. Like my mom, for example, she'll just drop stuff when we're cooking together or when we're like watching TV and I'm just like, oh my God, wait, like I need to write that down. So it can come up any time, but just kind of get a feel for like, what is the most organic way that your relative feels comfortable and safe, to share their story with you. And here are a couple of resources that can help to open up the conversation. Memory triggers could be family photos. Those are really great. Heirlooms, maybe nostalgic music, anything that just helps evoke memories of the past. Personally, I like to travel with my parents when they go back to Malaysia because when they are there in person, that's when they suddenly remember everything. And when they're in the US, it's very hard for them to access that. And then connection cards. These are another great resource. You can use question prompts from connection card games. And the two on the slide, the bottom one is Parents Are Human, comes in many different languages for different kinds of immigrant families from different places. And the one on top is called Heart to Heart, and it's a deck from the Chinese American Coalition for Compassionate Care. And it's really designed for people who are engaging with elders at the end of their life and want to talk about that in the stage and, you know, reflecting back on your life. Sochi, I think you might have DM'd me the links. Just switch it so that it goes to a larger group. But yeah, so Sochi will put the links to that in the chat, and you can check those resources out. Finally, in addition to oral histories, you can search for records in databases and archives as well. In Western genealogy, records are typically centralized by the government or the church. But in Chinese genealogy, records are usually kept by families and clan associations. So over the last 10 years, what we've done at My China Roots is to build very close-knit relationships with local villages in China, as well as overseas clan associations, so that we can digitize as many of these records as possible and just make them more accessible for you to search online. And so if you have a My China Roots subscription, you can search, you can save, you can translate all these different kinds of records from both overseas and mainland China. And if you have a free My China Roots account, you can build your family tree. And as our database grows, our system will like automatically send you hints for records that possibly match the ancestors in your tree. And so this is just a really great way to stay organized and just set yourself up for new discoveries to come your way. And I will say our family tree builder has some pretty cool like built-in features designed for the Chinese diaspora. So if you're like not sure, for example, how to write your surname in Chinese, you can type in the romanization, like the English letters, and it will reverse engineer suggestions for the Chinese character for you that would match the most. And so, yeah, you can sign up for free at mychinaroots.com/familytree and give that a try. And finally, to help make records more accessible, we are partnering with lots of libraries and universities across the US to offer full access to the My China Roots database. So you can see some of the ones on the slide. Also, I think Stanford, Berkeley are signed on. So yeah, if you live in any of those areas, you can log in with your library, or if you're a student, you can use your university account and log in to just search and view all the records that we have in detail for free. And if you'd like your local institution to offer this as a resource, feel free to email me, get in touch. We'd love to connect to try and make this available to your community as well. Okay, so far, just to review, we've talked about Rally. That is a more relational approach to data gathering, leaning into community and family. We've talked a little bit about research. This is a more intellectual kind of search for information. And finally, return. I like to see this as an embodied approach where you do a roots trip and actually travel back to your ancestral homelands. And that could be your ancestral village. That could be anywhere that your family once called home along their migration journey. But a roots trip is essentially an immersive experience where you can connect with your ancestors through all of your five senses, right? You can taste, you can see, you can smell, you can walk. And among the Chinese diaspora, roots trips have actually been practiced for as long as people have been leaving China. It's like a way to reconnect with family and contribute funds to support your community back home. In Chinese genealogy research, the village is especially key to learning more about your family. You can find like anything from family tree books to graves to temples, homes that your family lived in. In my case, found pretty much all of the above, I think. Yeah, and relatives and neighbors who had more memories and stories of our family. So can be quite a treasure trove of new information. And here are just some practical tips for making the most of a roots trip if you decide to organize one. I will say from personal experience, it can be very overwhelming to try to organize one on your own, especially if you don't speak the language or you've like never been back yourself before. So one service that My China Roots does offer is helping families design guided roots trips that are tailored to your family history. And so this way you can just focus on like being present and not worrying too much about the logistics. if you're not sure about actually traveling back yourself, one thing that we also do is like we have researchers on the ground in China who can represent you and go visit your village on your behalf. And so that's like, they'll interview people for you, document what is left, who is left, and essentially be your eyes, hands, and feet on the ground. So a lot of different options depending on, what you feel comfortable with. And just digging more information. So one of my favorite stories that I'll kind of close with is David Hum's. When he first contacted us, he'd actually already started making his own like DIY family tree book with like photos and stories and like this, really long PDF. But then our researchers went back to his village and actually found the original clan book and found two of his first cousins who were still alive. And like, I mean, they're in their 80s and 90s. So they were like really old, but very much conscious, very excited to connect with David. And so we put together a roots trip for David to travel back so that they could reunite. And now he's working on combining their family tree books. So the one that he made of like the overseas family and the one that they've kept in the village for all these years, and just put those two and two together to now tell the full circle story of their whole family. So as you can see from his quote, David was motivated to preserve family history as a legacy for his children to remember where they come from. And, that brings us back to remembrance and storytelling. So as you can kind of see, storytelling and data gathering go very much hand in hand. And it can feel like a lot sometimes, but take it one step, one question at a time, and just trust that the next generation will do their part too. I'm always reminded of the lyrics from the ending of Hamilton, if any of you have seen the musical, where they're like, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? And that part always gives me chills because like one day, like I will be gone and someone else will tell my story. And so until then, the best thing I can do is to listen, just be present to how my family stories are speaking to me, record and share what I'm learning, what I want our family to learn and remember. And beyond that, just let go of any outcomes beyond my control. And, like the next generation may or may not engage. I can't control it. But as family historians, and I say this, both to myself and to all of you here, it is totally okay to not fill in every blank. There will always be blanks to fill in. So do your part in a way that you feel like you can have peace of mind and pass it on from there. And just trust that the next generation will continue the story in their own way, just as you are doing now. And on that note, thank you so much. And feel free to connect and get in touch with me. And I'll hand it over now to Sochi to share her thoughts and open the floor for Q&A. I think we maybe have 10 or 15 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you, Chrislyn, for that. That was so beautiful. And that's just true how we need to, we have so many loved ones in our lives. And so being able to honor them and to bring them into mind, but just tell their story. And I think somebody said in the chat to make them immortal, or because they wanted to bring about immortality, which I think it's a really interesting idea, to be able to just bring people, carry on their story and make it generation after generation. I also think it's such a cool thing that Chinese families carry a clan book, that they have jiapus. If I'm not saying that correctly, I'm sorry, but
you are.
Yeah, that's just like a very interesting idea. And it's something that we have maybe digital versions, but there isn't something like equally like it. And that has so much history in there. So that's pretty great to experience for somebody who is Chinese American.
I see a question from Angela. If there's any stories I'm still trying to dig up. My short answer is yes, always. And that's sometimes feels like the problem where I'm like always just digging. I'm currently in a phase where I'm like trying to pause actually to just so I can like organize what I've already dug up. And yeah, just let that speak to me and organize it in a way that I can share it with my family. Yeah. So, but at the same time, like yeah, there's always so many questions to dig into. Like I want to know more about a lot of my great grandmothers and grandmothers and just a lot of like the women in the family, because it's often that women are not really recorded or represented too fully in records, especially like the zupu. Will often refer to them just as like wife instead of like actually giving them a name. So yeah, there's a lot of questions around the women in my family. And now that this year China has opened back up for travel, I would like to pick back up a lot of like going back to like my father's side of the family. I don't know too much about because my grandma cut ties with her family pretty young. But we're apparently Hainanese, so I would like to go back to Hainan and yeah, see how I feel there. So yeah, those are a couple directions. Does anyone else have any questions or even comments? Comments are also welcome. Let me see. Anita says, is it possible to hire someone to help interview family members in their native dialect, Taishanese? Yeah, that's totally doable. Kind of depends on like where you are, where the family is, and also what you feel comfortable with in terms of budget. I know there are like community wise, there's actually there's both groups. There's a group on Facebook and also a group on Discord that's dedicated to Taishanese language and culture preservation. So on that front, you can probably find a lot of like passionate volunteers who, depending on again where you are and where your family members are, would probably be interested in helping. I've seen them do that before. On the flip side, you can hire folks as well. At least for us within China, we have researchers that go back to Taishan regularly to visit villages, talk with relatives, record those oral histories, and send them back to the overseas family. Okay, yeah. So James Watts asked, are there hidden or lost stories I can discover, and where could I find them? You know, your family line is spread out from Ohio after 1807. How can you discover other lines of the family? A lot of directions there. But if you're okay, one is definitely DNA testing. If you feel comfortable with uploading your DNA, then you can see if and you can use services like Ancestry, 23andMe, etc. If it's like Western family, I guess, and then see if you get any matches there. That's one route. The non-DNA testing route would be through oral history. So kind of like the research section I talked about, doing interviews with people. It's hard for me to answer more specifically without knowing more about your situation. But I would be curious to find out, like, you know, who are the oldest people left in your family who can speak, you know, to another era. Who are the people in your family who are like the branch connectors who can, you know, introduce you, or you know, maybe they're still in touch with like the one aunt who lives like all the way over there, and maybe, you know, introduce you to the aunt, and the aunt can tell you what happened to the rest of the family. Otherwise, looking through like old photographs, sometimes the back of the photos there can be like written annotations that have clues. Yeah, just kind of have to go digging and see what comes up.
And then Helen said, session is most helpful and enlightening. I believe leaving a legacy or writing is necessary, especially for those of us who are migrants. Thank you so much. So made life easier. Yeah. I think it's really important as migrants to be able to, because America is full of migrants. Like it is a nation of migrants. So it's important to recognize where you're coming from, the stories of and the history of other lands and other nations, and then to keep that culture alive, even though there's so much diversity here, but it's really good to celebrate. And I also believe that any culture is worthy of it. And or person, you may not have very much history. You may only have yourself or maybe one other generation back, but it's just it's the best time to start is now, the way that Chrislyn put it. links that were shared. I'll put them together and share them out afterwards. But I just want to thank you, Chrislyn, for going through this talk today. It was really wonderful. You had a great presentation and like so much information to be able to do, and we can go through the different steps of storytelling and research. And I love the reflection time that you gave us. I think that that really helped like center and just like be able to understand like why we're individually we're trying to do this. So thank you so much for taking the time out and putting this workshop together.
Absolutely. Thank you for kicking this off. It is no small feat to bring us all together in this way. And to your point about the reflection, I mean, we only spent like, it was like less 10 minutes maybe writing. So that is a gift that you can give yourself, right? To carve out that time and just start writing. And honestly, just starting, like sitting down and starting writing is often the hardest thing. So actually, one thing that I recently started doing with some of my friends is starting like a family history writing circle. We've done maybe like 2 or 3 sessions so far. But already I'm like, wow, it is so much easier to sit down when I know someone else is waiting for me to hop on a call and do this together. And so tap into your community, tap into that peer support. Yeah, this isn't meant to be done alone. So I'm excited to tune into the upcoming talks that you've planned for the rest of this month and just learn from just the wisdom all around the table and just from so many different cultures. So yeah, thanks so much, Sochi. And
Yeah, of course.
for coming.
Yeah, hope to see everyone throughout the month. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.